You're listening to episode 31 of A Whole New You podcast. Today's show is the first in a series of episodes on the topic of anxiety. Today, Kim and Laurie share their personal stories and struggles with anxiety, as well as ways their coping mechanisms have changed over the years. We hope that by hearing our experiences today and listening to experts in the next few podcast episodes, you'll not only resonate with them, but also find healing, comfort, and practical tips to ease your own anxiety when it arises. Welcome to A Whole New You podcast. I'm your co-host, Kim Maravich. I'm a registered nurse and author of the book 360 Health. I'm joined by my dear friend, Laurie Biddle, a health and wellness coach certified through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. Our show exists to inspire and empower women to take charge of their health, with weekly tips and conversation about self-care, mindset, nutrition, fitness, and clean living. Please keep in mind that the material provided in this podcast is intended as general information only and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We're thrilled to have you here. Let's get to the show. Before we get to the episode, I'd like to read a podcast review that we received through iTunes. This is from The Real Amy Fox, and it's titled Such Great Info. She says, Kim and Laurie are amazing. I love their knowledge that they share on this podcast. I was able to connect with Kim on Instagram and have been so blessed with that interaction. I even consider her a friend, and we've never met. Keep up the great work, ladies. We support you 100%. Amy, thank you so much for taking the time to leave us a review, and I really feel the same way about you. Instagram is such a great way to connect with people, and we've been so blessed by our podcast Instagram community. We love all of our listeners and appreciate you supporting our show and sharing it with others. When you leave a review, it helps boost our rankings in iTunes, which in turn helps people find our show. So if you're listening today, we would love it if you left us a review in iTunes. You can also subscribe while you're there so you never miss an episode. If you do leave us a review, we'll be sure to read it on a future episode. So now let's get to the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today, Laurie and I are getting together for probably one of the last times before I move away. The podcast is going to go on. We can do a lot of this online, and I've told her when I come back to Pittsburgh, I'm going to plan to meet up with her and hopefully do podcasts face-to-face in person again. But it's a little bit sad for us. This is the end of June, towards the end of June when we are recording this, and we close on our new house August 1st. I'm not exactly sure when we're moving out there, but sometime around then. So we have some guests coming on the show. We have things lined up, but I think today and maybe one more time, Laurie and I are meeting to podcast together. So we're a little bit bummed here, a little bit sad. But just piggybacking off of that is some stress that's happening too. Laurie and I just had a real lengthy conversation about just lots of stuff going on in our lives, both of us. But for those of you who have moved before, and you have had to pack up a house, get it show ready, thinking about moving to a different place, getting movers and packers and all of that stuff. It's just probably one of the most stressful things that you can do in your life. There's a lot of excitement, so I'm trying to look towards the excitement and the happiness that's coming, but I would be lying if I said there wasn't some stress involved. And so that is actually a perfect segue to this episode today, and today's episode is on anxiety, and this is the first of several podcasts that we'll be airing. We're going to have some guests coming on to talk about different ways of dealing with anxiety and tackling anxiety from different stances, and so we will share more about that coming up, but we are very excited to have some guests coming on too. But Laurie and I thought it would be fun for us today to just fun talking about anxiety. I don't know if that's so fun, but it might be interesting for us to share our perspectives on anxiety, kind of maybe like our personal histories of anxiety, the ways we've dealt with it, just how it has impacted our life. And, if you're a living, breathing person, you have had anxiety in your life. So this impacts everybody.
And sometimes we can learn from others. And that's part of why we're sharing some of our, the details of our lives and just, how it has affected us so that maybe it can help you as well. So this is Kim talking, if you haven't realized. But what I thought I would start by saying is that anxiety has kind of affected my life ever since I was a little girl. And in fact, I remember I was probably like in third or fourth grade. It was fingerprint day at school, and there were some moms that came to the classroom to get us to go get our hands fingerprinted, and they could not get my fingerprints because my hands were so sweaty. And yeah, I was shy and an anxious little girl, and of course, like getting taken out of class and going somewhere I didn't know where I was going. And I just remember this mom like taking my hands and wiping them on her jean skirt. So, which is we're talking about the 80s here. But just so that they could dry my hands off to get fingerprints. So school was kind of like, a time that caused anxiety for me. Got better as I got older, but I think I always had a little bit of, not like school phobia, but just like anxiety around performing at school. I know I hated being called on, and if I didn't know the answer, I would just like put my head down and pretend almost like they didn't call on me. I don't know. It was just, I look back at that little girl and think, oh, I just wanted to like wrap my arms around her and say, it's going to be okay. But I've always kind of had that as part of my life. And then, anxieties from even driving in the car. And I love my dad 100%, but he's a nervous person. And I feel like some of that has rubbed off on me. And I'm speaking primarily, and if my sister's listening, she knows exactly what I'm talking about. Just driving in the car with my dad when I was little. He, would, of course, we were always safe, never had any car accidents or anything. But I feel like I was always worried we were going to get in a car accident. I was worried, somebody cut us off in the road. And I feel like that has kind of translated into my driving today. In just that, like, I feel like I'm hyper vigilant and just, I hate driving into the cities. In fact, my husband knows this, that I cannot drive into the city of Pittsburgh because it makes me so like anxious and worried and crisscrossing traffic and which way do I have to get off. And so again, another way that's manifested in my life. I think as an adult, there are times that I've been nervous. I was a cardiac care nurse, and there were times that I literally got sick on the way to work. Literally pulled my car over and got sick. And I think, looking back, this was a position that, supposedly great nursing students that came right out of school could get on this cardiac unit. And so it was kind of like a compliment, but it was like the worst situation for me as a nervous person to work in an emergency situation. It wasn't the emergency room, but it was like an emergency working in cardiac care, because you would go on to a shift and never know, if someone was going to code, and, people are really sick that are in the hospital anymore. And if there was a code in the hospital, they call it code blue. And then we had to run to the code because we were the cardiac nurses. And that just was like terrible for my temperament, and was one of the reasons that I needed to leave hospital nursing in general. Is just that it didn't jive very well with my personality. I posted recently on Instagram about I had taken a 23andMe test, which is like a DNA genetic. It's a saliva test, and it can tell your heritage, which is kind of one of the reasons I took it. But it can also tell a lot of other things. They test for genes and then tendencies, towards behavior in certain ways. So, for example, some of the genes they can test for through saliva is like the BRCA gene. They even will test for celiac, a bunch of things that are kind of very rare. But one of the things that came up on a report, and whenever they come up with a new report, they'll run your sample through again. And one of the new ones that came up was a fear of public speaking. And I tested more likely than average to have a fear of public speaking. Podcasting is a little different because we're like behind the mic, and no one can see me except for Laurie, and it's different. But I have always been, I don't like to talk in front of large groups of people. It's gotten better as I've gotten older. And it's kind of funny because I was a school teacher But being on stage in front of kids is a lot different than being in front of adults, because kids are like, they have no idea. They're in their own world and they just love you for like whatever. They don't have like that kind of critical eye that I think we develop as adults. But I thought that was interesting. That's one, thing that has caused anxiety in my life. And now I think, as I mentioned, now more than ever, just moving across the country and, not only just being responsible for myself, but for my whole family, like my whole house, my kids. I think you moms out there know the feeling of anxiety, just making sure that your kids are okay, that you're caring for them. You're trying to be super mom. You're trying to do everything and do it all well. And there's a lot of anxiety that comes from that. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves. So I feel it like kind of immensely right now. And this is a perfect time for these series of episodes to be released, especially for me in my life. One of the things I was telling Laurie is I recently took a hormone saliva test because, I know I'm perimenopausal. I'm 44. I have felt a little off, just not my normal self, and just wanted to check my hormones as best they can through saliva. And one of the things that I found was that my progesterone is kind of low and my DHEA is really, really low. And interesting reading about that. I told Laurie, I'm one of those people who's like, okay, give me a DHEA supplement and I'm just going to start taking that. But it didn't really sit well with my skin. So I kind of backed off on that. But what I was reading about it was that your DHEA can be really low because of stress in your life. Because when you have like higher cortisol, and the cortisol is that stress hormone that we know about, whether it's high or really low and depleted, it actually causes a depletion in progesterone, but it tanks your DHEA because that's, part of those, adrenal, comes from your adrenals. So the test told me that I was in adrenal fatigue, which I suspected. I had it pretty bad right after I had my son, Adam. So there are just, some things that in my life, I might have my kind of like diet together and might look healthy on the outside, but stress really, really, really plays a role in what goes on inside of your body, and that you can be completely depleted. And there is certainly a psychosomatic role to just the way we live, that anxiety can cause physical manifestations. It's not just in our minds. And that kind of leads me to my next point, talking just about some physical symptoms. So, when you think about anxiety in your life, it can look very different for everybody. And I know Laurie is going to talk about that too. But some of the things you might see are palpitations. I definitely get palpitations, of course, when I'm super nervous. Maybe you can experience sweating or feeling flushed. I personally can get really quiet. I internalize a lot. And so I think that's kind of like my introverted tendencies. But rather than talking through things like I probably should, sometimes I internalize it, which just depletes, my energy even more. I need to get better at that. Sometimes I get mad, and that's primarily probably at my kids, like when I'm at wit's end and I just can't take it anymore. Rather than being patient with them, I probably err on the side of getting mad. And that's, again, an indicator to me that I need a break. Like I need to walk away. I need to take care of myself for a while. Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe. There might be pain in my back or shoulder, some tightness. So, all of those things are physical manifestations. It might look like that for you, some of those too. When I think about college, which is another stressful time, when you're going off to school, you're kind of fending for yourself. You're having to, navigate all of the work that comes with it, making sure you're showing up for classes, trying to socialize and all that. That's a pretty stressful time. And I think back to some of the sort of like unhealthy ways I managed my stress. I was a runner, which is not an unhealthy thing to do, but I did run a lot. And sometimes running in excess can be a stressor on the body. It is a stressor on the body. And so it was good to clear my mind, but I also remember like having aching joints and things that were indicators that my body, like it didn't need to be going in an excess. And maybe that was trying to control weight or things like that in college. Because one other thing I listed here on my notes was that sometimes I drank too much. And, I think that's kind of the role of, a lot of college age kids. But that for me was, you've heard alcohol called liquid courage. And that certainly was for me sometimes in college. And, I look back and think, I really wasn't dealing with anything. It was just like, I'm stressed, like, let's go out for a drink, my friends, and that wasn't hard to find because everybody was going out. But I probably drank, too much. And rather than learning to deal with things head on, I just kind of masked it with that. Eating mindlessly has been another thing, that, I've posted about stuff like this on Instagram, but I think now, like, I tend to undereat when I'm stressed, but I think in the past, there were definitely times that I would just, I don't know, go to the store and grab a bag of Doritos and like eat it, like eat the whole thing. And now I'm more conscious of like my food choices, which maybe the reason why I don't eat enough sometimes when I'm stressed. But man, I used to just binge on things. And again, that's just like a way of numbing out from some of the stresses that we feel. Watching TV, I always thought was like so therapeutic, and I think it can be. I think it's good to take your mind off of things sometimes, but when you are like lounging around all day long and just watching TV rather than dealing with anything, that's an indicator that we probably need to deal with the problem at hand rather than just like numbing out. These are all things that, numbing out is good for a time, but not for a long time. So I listed some ways that I cope now, how my coping mechanisms have changed. Now, I will say, I just mentioned to you, I have adrenal fatigue again. I don't have this down by any means, and that's why I'm excited to have some guests come on the show to talk more about this. But I think I have gotten better and like knowing myself and knowing kind of stress levels I can handle, what I can't. So some of the things I try to do now are prayer. That's become really important to me, giving my worries, my anxieties to God, and just saying that like I can't handle this all and I need your help, God, and show me the direction. And there's a lot of peace that comes with that. I find that reading self-help books can help as well. Some of the ones that I'm kind of like leafing through again lately are things on, there's a book called Complaint-Free World, and I believe the author is William Bowen. That's a really good book because it makes you're making a decision to not complain about things, but rather to shift your perspective and focus on the positives. When I can follow that, he recommends going for like 30 days and you're supposed to move a bracelet from wrist to wrist. I think I've talked about this on the show before, but if you complain, you're supposed to move the bracelet to the other wrist and you're supposed to just try to keep it on one wrist for the whole 30 days. But it just is bringing conscience to the decision to not complain and focus on positives. Also, things like the law of attraction. I'm reading a book. I can't think of the name right now, but it's about like manifesting your destinies. It's by Esther and Jerry Hicks. It's a little out there. It's a little woo-woo, to be honest, but there are a lot of good points in it. And just that when you focus on the positives, it's kind of the same as like not complaining, but focus on the positives and looking specifically for joy. When you're feeling down, just not giving too much thought to that and focusing on other things, it really can change your perspective and actually attract more positive things into your life. And it really does work. And I wrote an Instagram post recently about how, like, experiencing the law of attraction in my life and just like this podcast, and that I had just put the intention out there that I wanted it, and things kind of fell into line. And I never thought that I wouldn't have it. I didn't, I wasn't sure how it was going to happen, but I always decided, I wanted to do a podcast, and things just happened. And I found my great friend Laurie, and we have been able to form this relationship. So just some other things I do: reading fiction. Again, that helps to take my mind off of things for a while. Exercising. And for me, some things are just like going for long walks. That is helpful for anxiety. I think other forms of exercise are great for getting in shape. And cardiovascular things can be good for taking your mind off of things. It's good for those endorphins. But I think, just like when you're super anxious, kind of being gentle with your exercise can be helpful. We've been doing some family therapy for my son. My youngest has some big emotions sometimes, and which causes me anxiety. And it's like a vicious cycle that I'm learning that, if I react to him, he reacts back. Nothing good is happening from it. And so what I've learned, it's like a positive parenting. It's called parent-child interactive therapy. For those of you who are interested, it's really beneficial. And it does really, really focus on rewarding the positives in children and the things that they're doing right, and making sure you're just uplifting those, just trying not to draw too much attention to the negative things that they're doing, ignoring it when possible, unless they're hurting themselves or somebody else. But that has been helpful too, just knowing that I couldn't do it on my own. I tried so many things, but seeing a therapist who knows what she's talking about and can give me tangible things, that's been a great thing for us. I've been saying no to a lot more, and that includes some of the work that I'm doing. Now, I don't have a 9-to-5 job, so I do have the luxury of saying no to some things. But I have needed to do that. My husband is the primary breadwinner. We're moving for his work, and do have the luxury to say that, I don't have to work right now. But even things that I like to do, like writing and blogging, I haven't been doing because it's causing too much stress with everything else that's going on in my life. And then some simple things like listening to other podcasts. I love ours, but I also love to listen to other ones. So that helps to kind of take my mind off of things, taking a hot shower, doing things like tapping and deep breathing, sleeping. I'm trying not to, unless I really have to be somewhere. I'm trying not to set my alarm clock. It's summertime. The kids don't have to be up early most days. So that can do nothing but good for us. We've talked about sleeping in depth in other episodes. I've also been taking some adaptogenic herbs like ashwagandha, which really, it's so beneficial. It's supplemental, but it's an herb. So it's not something you can like overdose on. It's not a medication. It helps to take the edge off, but it just allows you to deal with the stresses in your day. And one thing that I found, knowing that my DHEA is so low, is that ashwagandha has been shown to help increase naturally DHEA levels. So I've been increasing my ashwagandha, and I do feel like when I take that, it just takes that edge off. Like I just am not quite as uptight as I can be. And then I think lastly is just, again, as I've gotten older, is just not caring quite as much what other people think, not worrying. Like I used to get so upset if my son had a temper tantrum, like when we were in Target or something. And of course it's like, kind of embarrassing and I want it to end, but I cannot worry about what other people think. I can't worry about, I can't control their thoughts. I can only do what's best for me and my family, and just concentrating on myself. Life is too short. We're not here to please other people. We're here to do our life's work. We're here to do what God has called us to do. We're here to support our families. And I think just giving ourselves a little break from not, living up to these arbitrary standards, of, what other people think. I don't have to be like a super mom or the best mom or have the most well-behaved kids. I'm just living my life and I'm doing the best that I can. And I think just giving myself a break has really helped with anxiety too. All right, so I've talked a ton about this. I'm going to turn this over to Laurie because she has a lot of words of wisdom, but we have some good things in store for you.
Well, I just have to say thank you, Kim, for sharing all of that. And I know I can relate to so much that you just said, and I know a lot of our listeners can too. So thank you for sharing your personal experiences and your personal struggles, because we all have them. Looking back myself on probably the most anxious period of my life, and we all have them, they come and go. But I would say probably the most anxious I've ever felt, and you guys have heard stories in past episodes about the unraveling of my corporate career. But towards the end there, I was on an implementation team that honestly I probably didn't belong on in the first place, but I was on this team, And those of you who sit through meetings all the time will totally relate to this, because up until that point, I really didn't. Like, I had meetings here and there, but I, as an accountant, spent a lot of time at my desk, crunching numbers, working on spreadsheets, all that stuff. But during this period, which I think was probably part of my spiral, I was on this team that was in meetings all day long. I mean, all day, every day. And in these meetings, we talked about everything that needed done. And I could just feel my anxiety levels rising, because in all the talk about everything that needed done, like, we weren't doing it. We just kept talking about what needed done and not taking action. And what was happening was, okay, the workday was over, and there's these huge list of to-dos coming out of these meetings, and when are we supposed to do it? I'm going home to my family, which is a whole nother list of responsibilities for me. When am I supposed to do these things that we're talking about all day in these meetings? So for a while before that, I had been feeling like I was just like treading water, like every day, treading water. And I spent like several years being able to keep my head right above water. And it was borderline. It was probably up to my chin, but I was treading and I was doing okay. But during this time period, like, I went under. Like, I just completely went under. And I just felt like I couldn't keep up with anything at work. I couldn't keep up with anything at home. And I was literally drowning. And one day I walked out of a meeting at work. And I remember I was in the parking lot. This is probably like a full-on like panic attack. I've never had anything like this before in my life. This was a whole nother level of anxiety for me. But I was in the parking lot, like bent over, couldn't breathe, just like could not pull it together. Could not go back in there. And I called my husband when I finally could speak. And I was standing in the parking lot, as I mentioned, and I could see my car. My car was in sight. And my husband, who had been, going through this with me for months before that, and just kind of listening to everything going on and watching my downward spiral, he said to me in that moment, and I cannot say that he would have said this months before, but again, he was kind of watching this go on and go down, and he's like, just get in that car and drive away and don't ever go back. And let me tell you, I thought about it. At that moment, I was looking at my car, and I could just like envision myself getting in there and driving away, and that being the end of it. And I'm sure we all have those moments where we want to flee our lives because, it happens. But I pulled myself together and I went back inside. I actually went in and I think presented in a meeting after that. I don't know how I did it. But somehow I guess God gave me the strength to pull it together and do that. But I did that evening, come home and write my resignation, and, I handed it in. I found the courage to hand it in, but it did not end there. I stayed with the company for years after that, consulting and transitioning and all that stuff. So I definitely did not get in the car and drive away, even though part of me really wanted to do that. But that's my personal story of the most anxious time in my life. And though there have been many more on a day-to-day basis, that was probably the most extreme it's ever been. And that's when I knew I had to make a change. But what I want to talk about today is how changing your circumstances doesn't make anxiety go away. I have learned that firsthand. It changed the pressure cooker that I was in on a daily basis, and it changed the demands on me, and certainly lowered my stress levels from external sources. But I think a lot of times we produce our own stress. We produce our own anxiety. It's not always about what's going on around us in some aspects, because there's always going to be things going on around us. There's always things that we can find to be anxious about. And I've witnessed that with everyone I know. I've been really in tune to it lately. With my immediate family, with my extended family, with my friends, with just people, acquaintances. I've been really paying attention, and I see it with everybody. It doesn't matter the circumstances. it doesn't matter if you are an executive of a huge company that, is just has so much pressure at work, or you are retired and you don't have to go into your job every day and face those pressures. Everybody finds things to be anxious about. It's just the way it is. Even our children are stressed. It's I don't know if it's always been this way. I would say there's probably been some element of it, for ages, but it's definitely everywhere now. And, I see it in my own kids with, when they were little, it was maybe more of like a separation anxiety, and growing up, it's, academic pressures and social pressures of middle school, that they're dealing with. And, I've again watched it with everyone in my family, in my extended family, all of us. What's interesting though is that it manifests differently for everyone, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their demeanor even. Like a lot of people, you wouldn't even know that they're anxious, but when you really get down to it and you really have some deep conversations with people, everybody is experiencing it, everybody. And as Kim was talking about, the thing about anxiety is it's not just in your head. It's not just a mental thing. This is like a physical problem. There are physical things going on in your body that are affecting your health when you're feeling anxious. And it's scary. It's really scary because, we try to control our diets. We try to control, our fitness levels. There's a lot of things that are maybe a little bit more tangible that we can control. But you can be the healthiest looking person. You can be doing all the things, that we've traditionally been told make you a healthy person. And if you do not have your anxiety under control, you'll never be optimally healthy, because there's a physical reaction going on. There's inflammation, which we know inflammation is not something we want in our bodies. And I just keep hearing this message over and over again. In a previous episode, I talked with the owner of Be Balanced, and they are a hormone balancing natural weight loss center. And though a lot of people come for weight loss, and stress absolutely affects that 100%, not just diet and exercise, but, talking with them, it's also like the stress is, and Kim touched on this too with her personal experience, and I'm living it too. Like, our hormones are out of balance, not only because we're aging, but because we live stressful lives and we're riddled with anxiety all the time. So it definitely affects your hormones. And over the weekend, I was really honored to speak at a cancer seminar. And, one of the big themes I kept hearing over and over from other presenters and, the hosts of the seminar was just how much stress has an impact on your treatment for cancer, on your recovery, in the healing process. Anxiety comes from so many different sources. And I'll tell you, a huge source of anxiety is a cancer diagnosis. Absolutely 100%. That'll do it. No matter what else you have going on in your life. Talk about anxiety producing. But, in all these different aspects, and especially as they were talking about at the seminar, we have to learn to manage it. We have to learn to manage our anxiety if we want to prevent these diseases, if we want to heal from these diseases, if we want to be optimally healthy, we have to learn to manage our anxiety. And that is absolutely easier said than done, because, again, it's not even changing circumstances that's going to make that happen. It's all these different tools and all these different practices that we need to adopt to start to control this. And Kim touched on a lot of them. And, one thing I want to circle back to as well is, she talked about the cortisol levels and, about maybe, easing up on the exercise a little bit when you're feeling really anxious. And a lot of people, that is their go-to, right? To just go grind it out and sweat, and that can be very good. And we talked about this on the Be Balanced episode as well. Sometimes it's not good because it's raising those cortisol levels that are already high from the stress. So it's not helping that physical reaction in your body. And sometimes people stress over exercising or not exercising. They stress over what they're eating. So, that can be a little counterproductive. So we just need to, I think, start having a whole new awareness about the things that are bringing us anxiety and being extra conscious of that feeling that we're getting. And then Kim and I are bringing lots of really interesting people on for this anxiety series that we're doing that's going to give a lot of tips and tricks and tools in our toolbox to start to conquer this and help our families conquer this and our children especially. So I'm really excited to start this series. I know I'm going to learn a lot from the guests that we're bringing on, and I'm excited to get it started.
Me too. I think we all need it in our lives, and we hope that you will find it beneficial. Also, if you want to tag a friend when we post about it, or let somebody know about our podcast, I think this series will really be beneficial for many of us, especially all you moms out there and just anybody dealing with stress or, like Laurie said, an illness, which of course is anxiety producing as well. So we thank you for listening. We thank you for being with us. We also want to encourage you to subscribe to the show if you get a chance, because you will be able to get the episodes right away. You won't have to wait for them to air. They'll just show up right in your inbox at your podcast app. So if you would take a minute to subscribe in iTunes, we would appreciate it, because then, we're at least knowing that there are people out there who are, getting it directly. And of course, we post about this on social media, and we appreciate all of you who post about our podcast on social media too. But it does help to have subscribers there. And we just want to make sure we're reaching as many people as we can on this. So we thank you for being there, and we hope that you will enjoy the rest of our podcast about anxiety. Take care.
That's it for today. For more from Kim, you can go to kimmaravich.com. For more from Laurie, go to simplympoweredllc.com. We're always open to listener questions or suggestions for the show. You can email those to contact@awholenewyou.podcast.com. We'd also love it if you joined our Facebook community and followed us on Instagram. Just search for A Whole New You Podcast. And lastly, if you'd be so kind as to leave us a rating and review in iTunes, we would really appreciate that, so more people can find our show and join our community. We'll see you next week.